Introduction: The Dawn of Miracles. Welcome. Settle in and let your mind travel back over 2,000 years to the rolling, sun-baked hills of Galilee. History often turns not in the halls of kings or the vast amphitheaters of empires, but in the quiet, unassuming corners of the world. Our story today does not begin with a roar of thunder or the parting of a sea. It begins with the laughter of a village, the strumming of a lute, and the joyous celebration of a wedding in a small, obscure town called Cana. At this moment in time, Jesus of Nazareth is a figure on the precipice of destiny. He has recently been baptized in the Jordan River by John. He has spent 40 grueling days in the wilderness. He has only just begun to gather a small group of followers, rough-hewn fishermen, and seekers of truth. To the world, he is merely a carpenter's son, a rabbi from a town of no consequence. But what is about to happen at this wedding will pull back the veil on the cosmos. It is a story about the avoidance of shame, the quiet faith of a mother, and the profound, overflowing abundance of divine grace. This is the story of the first of his signs. This is the story of water turned to wine. Chapter 1: The Road to Cana. The Galilean sun beat down on the dusty road as a small group of travelers made their way toward the village of Cana. Jesus walked with a calm, purposeful stride. Alongside him were his newly chosen disciples: Andrew, Simon Peter, Philip, and Nathanael. Nathanael, in fact, was a native of Cana, and he walked with the eager anticipation of a man returning home to a grand celebration. They had been invited to a wedding feast. In first-century Judea, a wedding was not a brief afternoon ceremony followed by a polite reception. It was a monumental event, a festival that could last for up to 7 days. It was the absolute social apex of village life. Entire communities would pause their daily labors to celebrate the union of two families. As they approached the village, the air grew thick with the scent of roasting meats, baking bread, and blooming almond trees. The sound of tambourines, flutes, and joyous singing echoed through the narrow stone streets. Waiting for them at the feast was Mary, the mother of Jesus. She had likely arrived days earlier to help the host family prepare. For Mary, this was not just a social obligation, it was a labor of love. She was a woman who noticed the details, a woman who carried the joys and burdens of her community in her heart. When Jesus arrived with his disciples, the reunion was joyous. The master of the feast welcomed them warmly, and they took their places among the celebrating crowd. For the first few days, the wedding was a triumph of hospitality. The bride and groom, adorned in crowns of flowers and fine fabrics, sat like royalty. There was dancing late into the night, the sharing of stories, and the continuous pouring of wine. Chapter 2: The Well Runs Dry. In the ancient Near East, hospitality was not merely a matter of good manners, it was a sacred duty, a strict cultural law. To host guests was an honor, and to provide for them adequately was a reflection of the family's standing and honor in the community. And at the center of this hospitality was wine. Wine was a symbol of joy, of God's blessing, and of the harvest. As the Psalms declared, wine gladdens the heart of man. To run out of wine at a wedding was not just a minor catering error. It was a catastrophic social failure. It would bring deep, lasting shame upon the groom and his family, a humiliation that the village would remember and speak of for decades. It could even be grounds for a financial lawsuit from the bride's family. It was on the third day of the feast that the unthinkable happened. Behind the scenes, away from the dancing and the music, a crisis was unfolding. The servants, their faces slick with sweat and panic, were tilting the large clay amphory, desperately trying to coax out a few more drops. The master of the banquet was busy entertaining the wealthier guests, completely unaware of the impending doom. But Mary noticed. Perhaps she saw the frantic whispering of the servants. Perhaps she noticed the empty cups on the tables remaining unfilled. With the sharp intuition of a mother and a caretaker, she immediately understood the gravity of the situation. The joy of this young couple was about to be shattered. The music would soon stop, the laughter would turn to awkward murmurs, and the family would be ruined. Chapter 3: A Mother's Request. Mary did not go to the master of the feast. She did not go to the groom. She walked straight to her son. She wove through the crowded courtyard, finding Jesus sitting with Peter and John. She leaned in close, ensuring the other guests could not hear the desperate secret she carried. "They have no more wine," she said simply. It was a brief statement, but it held a universe of meaning. It was an observation, a plea, and a profound statement of trust all rolled into one. She didn't tell him how to fix it. She only knew that he could. Jesus looked at his mother. His response, translated through the ages, often sounds abrupt to our modern ears. "Woman, why do you involve me? My hour has not yet come." He addressed her as woman, a term of profound respect, akin to calling her ma'am or lady, but it marked a shift in their relationship. He was respectfully establishing a boundary. He was no longer just her son, the carpenter of Nazareth, ready to fix a broken table or solve a household problem. He was the Messiah, and his actions were now dictated solely by the will of his heavenly Father. When he spoke of his hour, he was speaking of his ultimate glorification, his death on the cross and his resurrection. He was asking her, "Is this the moment I reveal myself to the world? Is this the beginning of the road to Calvary?" Mary did not argue. She did not debate theology or plead with tears. She simply looked at him, her eyes filled with an unshakable faith. She knew her son's heart. She knew his compassion. Turning to the frightened servants who hovered nearby, Mary delivered one of the most powerful and enduring commands in all of history. "Do whatever he tells you." Chapter 4. The Stone Jars. Jesus sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the cosmos pressing down upon him. He looked at the celebrating guests, the radiant bride, the oblivious groom. He looked at his disciples, who were watching this exchange with curious eyes. Then he stood up. He walked over to the edge of the courtyard. Standing there, heavy and immovable, were 6 massive stone water jars. These were not ordinary pitchers used for drinking. They were carved from solid limestone and were used specifically for the Jewish rites of purification. Before eating, the guests would use the water from these jars to ritually wash their hands and arms, cleansing themselves of the dust of the world. Each jar held 20 to 30 gallons. Together, they could hold up to a staggering 180 gallons of liquid. Jesus turned to the servants. "Fill the jars with water," he commanded. The servants must have been utterly bewildered. Water? The guests didn't need to wash their hands again. They needed wine. To serve water to a guest expecting wine would be an insult, adding to the injury of the shortage. But Mary's words echoed in their minds. "Do whatever he tells you." The servants grabbed their wooden buckets and hurried to the village well. They lowered the ropes, pulled up the heavy water, and rushed back, pouring it into the massive stone vessels. Back and forth they went, their muscles burning, sweat stinging their eyes. They didn't stop until the water reached the very brim of all 6 jars. There was no room left, not for a drop of water, and certainly not for any trickery or hidden wine. Chapter 5. The Unseen Transformation. When the jars were full to the brim, Jesus stood before them. There was no grand incantation. He did not wave his hands or shout to the heavens. There was no flash of light, no rumble of thunder. The greatest miracles often happen in absolute silence. The creator of the universe, the Word through whom all things were made, simply willed it to be so. In the dark, cool interior of those stone jars, the molecular structure of the water obeyed its maker. The simple H2O, the clear, odorless, tasteless liquid, suddenly transformed. It deepened into a rich, dark ruby red. It took on the complex tannins, the sweet notes of fruit, the perfect fermentation that normally requires months of careful tending, crushing, aging, and pressing. Time was compressed in the blink of an eye. The water had recognized its creator, and it blushed. Jesus looked calmly at the head servant. "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." The servant's hand must have trembled as he dipped a silver pitcher into the stone jar. As he pulled it up, the liquid catching the afternoon light was no longer clear. The rich, intoxicating aroma of vintage wine hit his senses. The servant's eyes widened in shock, but he dared not speak. He hurried through the crowd, carrying the pitcher to the master of the feast. Chapter 6. The Best for Last. The master of the banquet, a man whose palate had tasted the finest vintages of the region, took the cup from the servant. He was likely annoyed to be interrupted, unaware of the panic that had just consumed the kitchen. He brought the cup to his lips and took a sip. He stopped. He tasted it again, letting the liquid roll across his tongue. His eyebrows shot up in absolute astonishment. This was not the cheap, watered-down wine usually brought out at the end of a multi-day feast. This was exquisite. It was perfectly balanced, robust, and full of life. It was the kind of wine reserved for kings and emperors. Laughing with delight, the master of the banquet called the groom over. He clapped the young man on the shoulder, holding up the cup. "Everyone brings out the choice wine first," the master of the feast boomed, his voice carrying over the music, "and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." The groom looked confused, but smiled graciously, accepting the praise. The shame had been averted. The honor of the family was not only preserved, it was elevated beyond measure. The music swelled, the dancing resumed with a renewed, fiery energy, and the celebration continued, overflowing with joy. Chapter 7. The Glory Revealed. While the guests drank and laughed, oblivious to the divine intervention that had just saved their feast, a quiet revolution was taking place among a small group of men in the corner of the courtyard. The servants knew what had happened. They knew they had poured mere water from the village well into those jars. And the disciples knew. Peter, Andrew, John, Philip, and Nathanael watched as the crimson wine was poured from the stone jars. Their minds raced, trying to comprehend the sheer scale of what they had just witnessed. 180 gallons of the finest wine imaginable, created from nothing. This was not a rabbi teaching them how to interpret the Torah. This was not a prophet merely speaking words of warning. As the Gospel of John would later record, what Jesus did here in Cana of Galilee was the first of the signs through which he revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. Before this moment, they had followed him because of John the Baptist's testimony, or because of a compelling invitation. But now, looking at Jesus as he sat quietly amidst the joyous celebration, their faith shifted from curiosity to awe. They saw the glory of God veiled in human flesh. Conclusion: the abundance of grace. The story of the water turned to wine at Cana is far more than a tale of a miraculous catering rescue. It is a profound, echoing symbol of what Jesus came to do on earth. Notice where the water came from. It was held in the stone jars used for the Jewish rites of purification. These jars represented the Old Covenant, the strict rules, the constant washing, the endless attempts of humanity to cleanse itself of sin through the law. The law was heavy, like the stone jars, and ultimately, it could only hold water. It could wash the outside, but it could not change the heart. Jesus took the waters of the old law, the waters of human effort, and transformed them into the wine of the new covenant. Wine represents joy, celebration, the Holy Spirit, and ultimately, his own blood that would be poured out on the cross for the forgiveness of sins. He did not just provide enough wine to scrape by. He provided an overflowing, extravagant abundance. 180 gallons of the finest wine, far more than a single village could ever drink. This is the nature of divine grace. It is never stingy. It does not calculate the bare minimum. Where human resources fail, where our own joy and strength run completely dry, God's grace overflows in staggering abundance. And it all began because a mother noticed a need, trusted her son, and told the world, "Do whatever he tells you." As the music faded on that final day of the wedding feast at Cana, the world had fundamentally changed. The old had passed away, the new had come, the hour had begun, and the best was yet to come. Thank you for joining this journey back to Cana. May you always find abundance when your own cup runs dry.